Hello, my name is Katie and welcome to my video. Before I get started with my August wrap-up, there's a few things I want to address. First, I'm in my new filming space. I am still working on the lighting. I think I'm going to have to get lights for in here because I don't have any well-placed windows. I have the one behind me, but because of the other things that are going on in the room, I can't set it up to use the natural lighting from the window. Plus I don't get a ton of light through that window. So I'm working that out. Sorry, I know it's like weird shadows and stuff, but I'm gonna get there, I promise. Second, I dyed my hair blue yesterday. Now, 2 days ago? I think 2 days ago. It's okay if you don't like it. I'm not sure if I like it. But it is what it is. I got bored and that's what happened. Also, my skin is still stained in some places and I can't do much about it. So you can laugh at that if you want. I had to go to the doctor with blue stained skin and that's kind of funny. Another thing I want to talk about, since this is my first wrap-up video, I want to give kind of an idea of how I rate books. I don't always rate books because there are times when I just don't feel strongly one way or another. If I don't have a reason to give a rating, I usually just won't. I did try to rate all the books I read this month though, and then we'll see if I continue to attempt to do that in the future or not. I'm also fairly generous with my ratings because I don't like to be mean to books. Occasionally, if a book really pisses me off or does something that I just can't stand, then I will rate it low. But on the whole, I tend to rate higher than maybe it merits rather than lower. So I think those are all the things I needed to get out of the way before we start. I read 16 books this month, which is kind of a lot. So maybe grab yourself a drink or a snack if you're gonna watch the whole thing. The second half of the month is pretty much all history related because of the history challenge, but the first half of the month is more of a mixed bag. The first book I finished in August was Devil in the Grove, Thurgood Marshall, The Groveland Boys, and the Dawn of a New America by Gilbert King. I gave this book 5 stars. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. The content in this book could be infuriating and heartbreaking and frankly disgusting at times, as it deals with a lot of racism. Groveland Boys were 4 black men living in Florida, and they were falsely accused of rape by a young white woman. The things that these men went through, with the sheriff and his deputy attempting to coerce confessions out of them, were infuriating. I was so angry at times reading this book at the miscarriage of justice that is clearly seen throughout the entire book. The book was balanced by a more positive note with the sections on Thurgood Marshall and his work with the NAACP, including his work trying to help get the Groveland Boys freed. It was a hard read. Knowing now what I know about the way that black men specifically were treated by the authorities and then comparing it to how they are treated now, it's difficult because it doesn't seem like very much has changed. And it's frustrating. I often wonder while reading the book how Thurgood Marshall would feel if he were here today looking at what's happening. So it was difficult to read, but I think it's a very informative read, and I think it's something that people should make themselves uncomfortable a little bit every now and again in order to really get a clear picture of what kind of world we live in. The next book I read was A Reaper at the Gates by Sabaa Tahir. This is the 3rd book in the Ember in the Ashes series. This is my 2nd time reading this book. I've been doing a reread this summer of the first 3 books in the series because book 4 is coming out in December and I'm really anxious to read it. So I just kind of wanted to refresh myself on the story and enjoy the world a little bit more. I only gave this book 3 stars this time around. I think I gave it 4 stars the first time, but I almost feel like instead of a quartet, this should have been 2 different duologies. Like, yes, they're following the same characters, but I feel as though from books 1 and 2, there was one goal and one thing they were trying to get at. And then in book 3, it feels like it kind of switches tracks a little bit. And now we're doing something totally different and we're going to new places. And because of that, the pacing just felt a little bit off. I was bored at times, which never happened in the first 2 books. I can't say much about this book, but just a brief overview of the series, if you haven't heard of it, is we're following our 2 main characters are Laia and Elias. Laia is a scholar girl, and the scholar people are being held under the rule of the Marshals, which is the group of people that Elias belongs to. They are kept as slaves, usually. They are forbidden to learn to do things like read and write. The series starts when Laia's family is killed and her brother is taken captive by the Marshals. She goes to the Resistance for help trying to get him freed, and they cut a deal with her to help free him if she will agree to go undercover as a slave to the commandant of Blackcliff. Now, Blackcliff is a school where they train the elite martial warriors known as masks, because they wear masks. So Laia agrees to do this, and the story kind of kicks off from there. Elias is attending Blackcliff when we start that book. He is supposed to be graduating, and he has this plan to run away after he graduates because he does not want to live the life of a marshal. He doesn't believe in what they're doing. Laia and Elias end up meeting, and the story just kind of goes from there. It's a really good series. If you like fantasy at all, I would maybe give this series a go. The next book I tackled in August is Anna of Cleve, The Princess and the Portrait by Alison Weir. This is the 4th book in Alison Weir's 6 Tudor Queens series, and I didn't care for this one as much as I cared for some of the others in the series. My main issue with this book, I think, is that there's just not that much actually known about Anne of Cleves, and so the author tried to just create things, I guess. And she explains in the author's note where she's coming from and why she chose to do that, but it didn't sit well with me, and I found a lot of it just to be really boring. Like, I think it could have used a really good edit and at least 100 pages cut out. However, overall, I do enjoy the series. You'll see a little bit later on, I read the 5th book in the series. So if you like the Tudor period, if you like learning about Henry VIII's court and his wives, this is a really solid historical fiction series. I think I only gave this one 3 stars. However, the Katheryn of Aragon book and the Jane Seymour books were completely delightful. So if you were thinking about giving this series a try, I would recommend it. Next in August, I read another complete trilogy, actually. It is the Southern Reach trilogy, starting with Annihilation, then going to Acceptance and Authority, all by Jeff Vandermeer. Annihilation was a reread for me, and I actually liked it better the second time around. I think the first time around I liked it, I'm pretty sure I still gave it 5 stars, but I spent a lot of it, like, just my mind couldn't grasp what was happening. So rereading it, knowing what I know, it was a lot easier to get through and just thoroughly enjoyable. Annihilation follows a biologist. We never do learn her name. She is simply known as the biologist. And she is a part of a group of explorers who goes into this area known as Area X, and a lot of very almost otherworldly things have been happening there. And this government agency known as the Southern Reach has been sending people into this area to try and figure out what has been going on and why. So this is essentially the biologist's journal of her time in Area X. And It's so good. I honestly wish I had just kept my love of the series and just left it at this book, because reading the other two books kind of ruined the whole thing for me. Authority and Acceptance I both gave 2 stars to. Authority, it was so boring. So now, instead of following the biologist, we are back in just the regular world, not in Area X. And we're following people who work at the Southern Reach, mainly their new director. He is known as Control. And he is not that, he's just not that interesting of a character, and he should be, because his mother and his grandfather were both spies that worked for the government, and that's how he got this job. But it was just, I don't know if the pacing was off, or if the sense of mystery and eeriness was just gone, but I just didn't get on with this book. I thought that Acceptance was going to be better, because it started off pretty solid. We start getting perspectives of people who have been talked about, but we never really got to know their story, and now we're getting to hear from them. But this ended up getting 2 stars too, because again, the pacing just felt off. And I feel as though there was so much unnecessary exposition that we almost could have just combined these books into one, like cut them both in half and made them one book, rather than stretching them out into 2. So I was really disappointed, and I kind of wish I hadn't bothered finishing the series. The next book I read in August is a nonfiction. It is Accessory to War, The Unspoken Alliance Between Astrophysics and the Military by Neil deGrasse Tyson and Avis Lang. I loved this. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and the reason it didn't fully get 5 stars was because the first few chapters just felt like they didn't need to be there. In at least the first 2 chapters, and I think possibly the first 3, they're discussing the role that the sky played in early civilization with helping the people to tell time and to navigate and things of that nature. And then they go into the early history of the telescope. And that was cool and all. It just didn't seem strictly necessary, given that it's supposed to be about astrophysics and the military. Aside from that, I really enjoyed the book, and I would highly recommend it. Just maybe if you already have an idea of how the sky was used to tell time and navigate, you could probably just skim through the first few chapters. But once it gets into the meat of the book, it's really good. And Neil deGrasse Tyson has a lot of interesting stories to tell, and he doesn't try to hide his feelings about the military and some of the decisions that government has made. And he also explains maybe why, just because the military is doing this, it doesn't mean that that's what astrophysicists believe, and that's not usually what they're going for with their research. So yeah, if you're into science at all, I would say give this one a go. The final book I finished before the start of the History Challenge was Good Me, Bad Me by Allie Land. I was incredibly concerned that this book was not going to be any good, and I was so happy that I enjoyed it. I think I also gave this one 4 stars. It is a thriller in a way. It doesn't always feel incredibly thrilling, but I think that is what it's supposed to be classified as. It's about this girl, and her mother is a serial killer. We find out in the first chapter, that she is the one who turns her mother in, and they give her a new name, the authorities do, and they place her in a foster home. And we get to kind of follow her with her new family, and we see her hopes for the new family and the new school and how she wants to fit in. But things don't really go according to plan for her. And I don't want to say too much more, because it is one of those books that the less you know, the more you're going to enjoy it. However, one thing that I really enjoyed about the writing, and I think Allie Land did a great job with, was the main character. The main character, Millie, she'll notice things, and she'll just briefly mention them in passing. Something she's seen, something she heard, and you don't really see the significance of it until a few pages or even a couple chapters later, and all of a sudden it'll come to light what she's doing with that information. And just the craftiness behind it, I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the way this was written. Now we're going to get into the books that I read during the History Challenge. The History Challenge was a readathon put on by Emma from A Cup of Books, Jenny from Bookish Shenanigans, and Justin from Triumphal Reads, and Justin from Ghost Reader. It was such a fun time. I had so much fun chatting with the hosts and various other people on Twitter and doing the reading sprints, and I really hope they bring it back next year. The first book I read for the readathon, however, was a serious disappointment. That was The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. I gave this 1 star. I don't really want to talk about it anymore. I have an entire rant video on it that I will link in the description box. And honestly, good riddance. The next book I finished during that readathon was significantly better, and that was Sea People, The Puzzle of Polynesia by Christina Thompson. This book was everything. I think it's probably on my favorite books of the year list. I'm pretty sure. The discussion in this book surrounds the people of Polynesia and trying to determine how these people ended up on these islands scattered throughout the Pacific. The different methods that have been used throughout the years to try and determine where these people came from, things such as launching sea voyages in which they tried to make canoes as similar to what the Polynesian people had, and they attempted to navigate without modern technology, and just see if they could get to these islands from various points on different continents. There also was kind of a study of linguistics done to determine where the languages that these Polynesian people spoke originated from. I love linguistics, so that was great for me. If you can't tell, I gave this book 5 stars, and then I immediately went and watched Moana. The next book I read was Katheryn Howard, The Scandalous Queen by Alison Weir. This is book 5 in the 6 Tudor Queen series, and I liked it a lot more than I liked the Anna of Cleve book. Katheryn Howard is not my favorite of the wives. There's nothing particularly wrong with her, in my opinion. She is not someone I would likely be friends with. Tends to be, well, I don't know if she is, but she comes across as vain and a little silly, but she also was incredibly young. This book, I think, did a great job of exploring her early life and showing that her childhood was maybe not all it could have been, and that possibly she was exposed to things at a young age that maybe she shouldn't have been. Her mother died when she was quite young, and I have a feeling that her life may have turned out very differently had her mother not died when she was a child. But yeah, this was actually, for a historical fiction like this, I don't tend to find them incredibly fast-paced, but this one kind of was. Following her life and her going to court and all these exciting things that she was doing, it really just kept me flipping pages, and I enjoyed it. The one thing I didn't enjoy about this, and the reason I gave it 4 stars instead of 5, was the character of Jane Rockford. There was never really a reason given for why she was so hell-bent on helping Katheryn Howard and her supposed lover, Thomas Culpepper, be together. There were vague discussions of how maybe she's in love with Thomas Culpepper herself, or perhaps she just gets off on other people doing bad things. And then there was a moment where she says that if King Henry dies, there's a chance that Katheryn Howard would be regent for his son Edward, and so she's trying to foster goodwill. But she was already heavily involved in this situation before Katheryn was even really noticed by King Henry. So that didn't really ring true for me, and that just kept bugging me throughout the entire story. It just felt like there was no reason for her to be behaving in the way that she was. The next book I got through for the History Challenge was Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy, 4 Women Undercover in the Civil War by Karen Abbott. This book I gave 4 stars. It probably could have been a 5-star read, but there were just a few things that I wasn't totally sure of the authorial intent behind, and so I felt I couldn't quite give it a full 5 stars. Also, I really only felt extreme interest and connection to one of the 4 women. The woman whose story I enjoyed the most was Elizabeth Van Lew. She was living in Richmond, which was the capital of the Confederate States of America, but she was a staunch Union supporter. Under the guise of Christian charity, she initially was just trying to get into the prisons that the Union soldiers were being held in and provide food and medical care and things to them. But then she becomes a spy for the Union fairly quickly. And I just loved following her story. It was so good. The other characters I didn't care for quite as much. One of the women, Rose Greenhow, she was quite interesting herself, but the way in which she would use her young child to obtain information and the way she put her at risk really didn't sit well with me. And I don't know. I didn't care for her because of that. That and the way it was written, it seemed as though the author was trying to imply that Rose Greenhow was essentially trading sexual favors for information. And I just don't know. I would like to know how much evidence there actually is for that. I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure how I feel about that insinuation, and I wish maybe if there had been some actual evidence given for it, but instead it was just sort of implied that that's what was happening. And that also didn't really sit well with me. Something I thought really interesting about Rose Greenhow, though, was these men, and they were all Union men, because she lived in Washington, D.C., but she supported the Confederate States of America. And these men would just tell her things. They would just tell her things as though she can't possibly retain or do anything with information once they're gone. And so they're so intent on catching Rose Greenhow, and I'm like, shouldn't you just be telling your men to shut up? Seriously, though. And she's put on trial at one point. And she's like, I never solicited this information. Am I really not allowed to write in my private correspondence what I wish to? And I was like, well, you got a point. The other 2 characters were quite a bit younger than Rose Greenhow and Elizabeth Van Lew. And because most of the information for these women come from their memoirs and their personal letters and things of that nature, I just find that perhaps the other 2 girls who were younger, Belle Boyd, who was about 18, and Emma Edmondson, who was also roughly 18, 19, their stories seem a little bit sensationalized. And Karen Abbott does, in fact, say that there are certain things that these women claimed that were verifiably untrue. So because of that, I find myself rolling my eyes at a lot of things. Emma Edmondson, in one part in her memoirs, tells this story about how she had disguised herself as a man to become a soldier for the Union, and she did actually do that, and she did a lot as far as serving her country goes under that guise, but she describes going to see her family while dressed as a man, and nobody really recognizes her, and then her mother is suddenly like, oh, you remind me so much of my daughter Emma, and she sweeps off her cap and says, Mother, it is me. And I don't buy it. However, I suspect that Karen Abbott put these things in the story as a way to show who these characters were. Because to me, what that shows is that what Emma Edmondson wanted more than anything else was to be accepted for who she was and for people to love her. And so I'm wondering if that in fact was Karen Abbott's intent, because I don't believe that she just fell for that story and honestly thinks it's true. I really think that it's more of a way for her to try and give you a sense of who these characters were. The final woman we're following is Belle Boyd, and Belle Boyd irritated me so much. She did some great things. She really did. She was a supporter of the Confederate States of America, which is annoying. Just the way she would say things as far as how she believed would really just tick me off, because I'm a 21st century audience. So therefore, my beliefs and the way I see the world is vastly different. However, the way she treated her work as a spy was very, very much like it was just something fun for her to do. Like, she needed excitement in her life, and this provided it. It didn't seem like her intentions were honorable at all. I just didn't care for that. I didn't care for her attitude. So, you know, overall, I think 4 stars. It's a solid read. It's definitely one that keeps you invested. It keeps you wanting to read more. So if you're interested at all, then yeah, I would recommend you pick this up. The next book I finished is a bit of a cheat because it's not history. I had started it earlier in the month and I wasn't that far from done, and I wanted to finish it up before the month ended. And that is Damned Lies and Statistics, Untangling Numbers from the Media, Politics, and Activists by Joel Best. This book I gave 3 stars to. It was really an intriguing look at statistics and how they are formed, and the types of questions you need to be asking yourself when you see a statistic being used, such as who is presenting the statistic, what type of bias might they have. If they're using it as a comparison with something else, you need to look at, are these comparisons actually valid comparisons? So it was a really, really good book in that sense. However, I felt it was a little bit juvenile at times. There were several chapters in which the main points in every paragraph would be italicized, as though you wouldn't understand what he was driving at unless it was pointed out to you. This book also got really repetitive at times, and that I found myself like skimming at points because I was like, we definitely already went over this. But just as a good kind of look at what maybe you should be aware of when you are looking at statistics, I think it was pretty solid. There was a lot of good information in here. The next book I read during the History Challenge was The Book of Lost Friends by Lisa Wingate. This book is set in a post-war Louisiana, and it also kind of ends up in Texas. We're following 2 different timelines. One is in 1875, where we are following a former slave. Her name is Hanny. And the other is in 1987, where we are following a school teacher. Now, first things first, I'm never quite sure how I feel about white authors writing black perspectives. And here, it's pretty clear that she did a lot of research, but I will say that Hanny's voice never truly felt authentic to me. I never was able to get attached to her as a character because it felt like she was just like a carbon copy of a person. And so I didn't care for that at all. The whole storyline in 1875 with Hanny, really, I found it to be almost tedious at times, because to be fair, pretty much none of the characters really sparked any interest in me or made me feel connected to them and what they were going through. The timeline in 1987, though, I really enjoyed. We're following a woman called Benny Silva. She is a teacher who agreed to work in schools in an impoverished area for 5 years in exchange for her student loans being paid off. She gets sent to a school in Louisiana, and she quickly realizes that this is nothing she's ever experienced before. The teachers and the principal don't care about these students. Nobody does. The main purpose of the teacher seems to be to keep the kids in their desk for an hour and probably like prevent them from smoking. Like, that's it. There is no intention of actually teaching them things, and every time she tries to get funding to do things with the kids, she gets turned down. Eventually, after perseverance, she gets a woman who is well respected in the town. Her name is Granny T. That's how she's referred to anyway. And she comes and she speaks to the students, and they start this history project in which they learn about their family's origins in the town. and they're going to put on a little bit of a demonstration about what they've discovered about their ancestors. And the students get really invested in it, and Benny finally feels as though she's succeeding in her job of being a teacher. And I loved that storyline. I loved how invested the kids got and how much she wanted to do right by them. My other issue with the book did have to do with Benny's storyline. At several points, they mention that there is something in her past that she's just kind of hiding from, and she didn't grow up that well. Her father pretty much walked out on them, and her mother was not incredibly present. But in the epilogue, they threw in this thing, and I don't want to tell you what it is because spoilers, but I was just like, really? Was that totally necessary? Like, I felt as though it just kind of took away from the rest of her story, and it seemed so just shoehorned in, and I didn't understand what the point was at all. So that bothered me. The issues I had with Hanny's storyline bothered me, and that's why this got 3 stars. It wasn't a bad read, it just also wasn't that good. The next book I got to, and we are almost done, I promise, is Atomic Love by Jenny Fields. I got this in my Book of the Month box this month, and I was so excited for it because it follows a woman called Rosalind, and she is a scientist, she's a physicist, which I rarely see in books. And as a woman who is in a STEM field myself, I appreciate that. So Rosalind worked on the Manhattan Project, and we are now in 1950s, so we're solidly in the Cold War era. And Rosalind is still dealing with her guilt over the role she played in the creation of the atomic bomb. Also, she is still kind of trying to get over heartbreak as this man that she was completely in love with brutally dumped her and then also caused her to lose her job. So she's struggling, and out of the blue, this former lover contacts her. And at first she's like, oh great, now what? But then she's also contacted by the FBI, and they are trying to enlist her help because they believe that this man has been selling secrets about the atomic bomb to Russia. This should have been a 5-star read. Based on that synopsis alone, it should have been one of the best things I've read all year. However, we pretty quickly get into a love triangle, and while it is less annoying than most, it still wasn't that great. Also, the relationship dynamics never really felt genuine to me, especially with the man she more or less ends up with in the end. I never got it. They have this moment, and we're supposed to have felt that there's this passion and this sexual tension between them the whole time, and like I never ever felt it. So when they did finally get together, I was like, but why? Like, you don't even know each other. The other thing was that the sex scenes, while blissfully short, were incredibly cringy. I don't usually suffer from secondhand embarrassment, but oh man, did I feel it in this. So I gave this book 3 stars. It's worth a read. If this synopsis sounds at all interesting to you, I would go ahead and pick it up because the main storyline itself is solid. Just the relationship aspects of it are trash. And finally, the very last book I read in August. The Romanovs, 1613 to 1918 by Simon Sebag Montefiore. This book was a challenge. I listened to it on audiobook, and that was a blessing and a curse. I think if you're going to listen to it on audiobook, you also kind of need to simultaneously be reading it as well, or at least at the beginning of each section, checking back in, because they do have character names of people who are going to be in the next section. There are so many people involved in this. I mean, it's 300 years, so of course there are going to be a lot of people involved in this. but not much detail is really given about most of these people, and so a lot of them, because they have the same names, end up quite interchangeable, which I'm not sure if it's the fault of the author or if it's just this is such a huge thing to tackle that some things just had to get left out. I gave this 3 stars. I did like it. Okay, I think it's worth a read. It's a nice introduction to, well, the Romanov dynasty. However, I think perhaps what would have been better for me would have just been to pick a few individuals, such as Katheryn the Great or Alexander II, and just find a book specifically on them. Because I think it would have been much more what I was looking for. You would have gotten a more dynamic look at who they were, their personalities, things they loved, things they hated, stories about their life. There just wasn't the room to put in this massive tome. So that's personally what I would do if you have an interest in Russian history. However, if you do just want like a brief overview, I guess, of all the rulers of Russia, it's not a bad book for that, and it will likely give you some specific characters that you want to learn more about. However, it's a really big commitment to just be a starting point for learning. And that's it. That's the 16 books that I read this month. It was a surprisingly good reading month. I don't think my next few months are gonna be as successful, just because life has really gotten busy. But you know, we can hope. If there are any books here that you have read before and you would like to talk about, go ahead and leave that in the comments. I'd love to chat with you. If you want to pick up any of these books, also let me know that. If you like my content, subscribe. Stick around. We have some fun things coming out. Thank you for watching.